The cold wind blew through the empty streets as Marcus pulled his thin hoodie tighter around his small body. He had been living on the streets for almost a year now, and every night felt harder than the one before. He missed having a warm bed, a home, and most of all, his mother. She had always protected him, even when they had very little. But when she got sick, everything changed. At first, they had stayed in their tiny apartment, hoping she would get better. But without money for medicine or food, things only got worse. One night, she held his hand and told him to always be a good person, no matter how hard life became. The next morning, she was gone. Since then, Marcus had been on his own. He tried staying in shelters, but they were always full. Sometimes, people were kind and gave him food. Other times, they ignored him like he didn't exist. He learned to survive by collecting cans and bottles to sell. On lucky days, he found a few dollars lying on the ground. But most days, he went to sleep hungry. Tonight, his stomach growled as he walked past bright restaurants with people laughing inside. The smell of warm food made his mouth water, but he knew better than to stop. If he stood too long, people would stare or tell him to leave. So he kept moving, hoping to find a warm place to rest for the night. As he reached the park, he spotted an empty bench under a broken streetlight. It wasn't much, but it was better than sleeping on the cold sidewalk. Just as he was about to sit down, something caught his eye. There on the other end of the bench was a purse. It was a nice purse, made of shiny black leather. Marcus glanced around, but no one was nearby. He hesitated before picking it up. His heart pounded as he slowly unzipped it. Inside, he saw a wallet, a phone, and a set of keys. The wallet was thick, filled with cash and credit cards. For a moment, his hands shook. He could take the money and buy food. He could find a warm place to sleep for a few nights. No one would know. No one would care. But then he heard his mother's voice in his head. Be a good person, no matter what. Marcus took a deep breath and zipped the purse back up. He had made his decision. Somewhere out there, someone was probably scared and searching for it. He knew what it felt like to lose something important. He knew what it felt like to have nothing. Tightening his grip on the purse, he stood up. He didn't know where to start, but he would find the owner. And even if it didn't change his life, at least he would know he had done the right thing. Marcus held the purse tightly as he walked through the quiet streets. His heart pounded with every step. He had never been in a situation like this before. A part of him wondered if he was making a mistake. What if someone accused him of stealing? What if the owner thought he was a thief? But he pushed those thoughts aside. He knew deep inside that he was doing the right thing. His mother had always told him that honesty mattered more than anything. No matter how hard life got, he had to be a good person. That was the only way to live with dignity. He decided to check the purse for any clues about the owner. He found a wallet with an ID card inside. The name on it read Linda Whitmore. Next to the name was an address printed in small letters. Marcus stared at it for a moment. He wasn't familiar with the street, but he knew it was in a nicer part of the city, a place where people like him weren't welcome. He hesitated. Should he really go there? What if the woman thought he was trying to trick her? But then he thought about how scared she must be, realizing her purse was gone. He had been in that situation before, losing something and feeling helpless. He couldn't just ignore it. Determined, Marcus started walking. The journey was long, and his stomach ached from hunger. He passed by bright stores with mannequins dressed in fancy clothes and cars that looked shinier than anything he had ever touched. The sidewalks were clean, the buildings tall and modern. Everything felt different from the streets he knew. After what felt like forever, he finally reached the address. It was a tall apartment building with glass windows and a doorman standing at the front. Marcus suddenly felt small. His clothes were dirty, his shoes worn out, and he knew he didn't belong in a place like this. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward. Before he could say anything, the doorman frowned. "You can't be here, kid. Move along," he said firmly. Marcus panicked for a second, but quickly pulled out the purse. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I found this, and it belongs to someone who lives here. Her name is Linda Whitmore." The doorman looked surprised. He glanced at the purse, then at Marcus. After a moment of hesitation, he nodded and picked up a phone. "Wait here," he said before making a call. Marcus stood outside, shifting nervously from foot to foot. He didn't know what would happen next. Would Linda believe him? Would she even care? A few minutes later, the front doors opened, and a woman stepped out. She looked to be in her late 30s, dressed in elegant clothes. Her eyes widened the moment she saw the purse in Marcus's hands. "You found it," she gasped, walking quickly toward him. Linda stared at the purse in Marcus's hands as if she couldn't believe her eyes. She quickly took it from him and opened it, checking inside. Her wallet, her keys, her phone, everything was there. She let out a breath of relief and looked back at Marcus, her eyes filled with surprise. "You really found this?" she asked, her voice softer now. Marcus nodded. "It was on a bench in the park," he explained. "I thought maybe you'd be looking for it." Linda was silent for a moment. Then she shook her head in amazement. "I hadn't even realized it was missing yet. I must have left it behind when I was on a call earlier. I can't believe you brought it all the way here." She looked at him closely now, really seeing him for the first time. His clothes were worn, his shoes looked too small for his feet, and his face had that tired look of someone who had been struggling for a long time. But there was something else in his eyes: honesty, kindness, and quiet strength. She reached into her purse and pulled out some money. "Here," she said, holding it out. "This is for you. It's the least I can do to thank you." Marcus glanced at the money. It was more than he had seen in weeks. His empty stomach twisted, reminding him how hungry he was. But then he shook his head. "No, thank you," he said firmly. "I didn't return it for a reward. I just wanted to do the right thing." Linda blinked in surprise. She had expected him to take the money without hesitation. Most people would have. But this boy was different. He had nothing, yet he was refusing a reward. For a moment, there was silence between them. Then Linda smiled. "All right," she said, slipping the money back into her purse. "But I still want to do something for you. Can I at least buy you a meal?" Marcus hesitated. He wasn't used to people offering kindness without expecting something in return. But his hunger won the battle, and he nodded slowly. "That would be nice," he admitted. "Great," Linda said warmly. "Come on, there's a diner around the corner." As they walked, Marcus felt a little out of place beside her. She looked like she belonged in a world so different from his own. But for some reason, she didn't treat him like an outsider. When they reached the diner, the warm smell of food filled the air, making Marcus's stomach growl. Linda led him to a booth and handed him a menu. "Order whatever you like," she said. Marcus stared at the menu, overwhelmed by all the choices. It had been so long since he had been able to choose what to eat. Finally, he pointed to a simple burger and fries. Linda smiled. "Good choice," she said, placing the order. As they waited, she leaned forward, curiosity in her eyes. "So tell me, Marcus," she said gently. "What's your story?" Marcus hesitated for a moment. He wasn't sure how much he should say. Most people didn't care about his story. Some looked at him with pity, others with suspicion. But something about Linda felt different. She wasn't looking at him like he was just another kid on the streets. She looked like she really wanted to understand. He took a deep breath. "My mom and I used to have a small apartment," he started. "She worked hard, but when she got sick, she couldn't go to work anymore. We didn't have enough money for rent, and one day we had to leave." Linda's eyes softened. "How old were you?" 11, Marcus said. "At first, we stayed in shelters, but they were always full. Some nights, we had to sleep outside." She tried to make it seem like an adventure, like we were camping. "She didn't want me to be scared." He paused, his throat tightening. But then she got worse. Linda didn't say anything, but her expression told him she understood. He swallowed hard and continued. One night, she told me that no matter what happened, I had to be strong. She said to always do the right thing, even when it was hard. The next morning, she was gone. A lump formed in Marcus's throat, but he pushed it down. He had told himself that he wouldn't cry anymore. He had to be tough. Linda reached across the table and placed a gentle hand over his. "I'm so sorry, Marcus," she said softly. "That must have been so hard." He nodded, staring at the table. "After that, I was on my own. I tried to stay at the shelters, but sometimes there wasn't room. I started collecting cans and doing little jobs to buy food. Some days are okay. Some days," he trailed off, not wanting to sound like he was complaining. Linda was quiet for a moment, as if thinking. Then she asked, "Do you have any family? Anyone who could take you in?" Marcus shook his head. "Not really. My mom didn't have any brothers or sisters. I don't even know my dad." Linda sighed and leaned back in her seat. "You shouldn't be out there alone," she said, more to herself than to him. "No kid should have to live like that." Marcus shrugged. "It's just how it is," he said simply. He had accepted it a long time ago. Linda was silent for a long time. Then she smiled. "You know, Marcus, you remind me of someone I used to know. Someone strong and kind." Marcus looked up, curious. "Who?" "My brother," she said. "He went through a lot when we were kids, but he never let it change who he was. Just like you." Marcus wasn't sure what to say. No one had ever compared him to someone like that before. Linda tapped her fingers on the table, as if making a decision. "Listen, Marcus," she said. "If you ever need help, real help, I want you to call me." She pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. Marcus picked it up, reading her name and number. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I mean, you don't even know me." Linda smiled. "I know enough," she said, "and I know that good people deserve a chance." Marcus stared at the card for a long time, unsure of what to say. No one had ever made an offer like this before. He didn't know if he could trust it, but for the first time in a long time, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. The sky was dark, and the cold wind bit at Marcus's skin as he walked through the city streets. His thin hoodie did little to keep him warm, and his stomach ached from hunger. It had been 2 days since he'd eaten a proper meal, and tonight, the rain made everything worse. Water dripped from his hair as he curled up in the doorway of a closed shop, trying to stay dry. He pulled Linda's business card from his pocket and stared at it. He had kept it safe, tucked away like it was something valuable. But he hadn't called. He didn't know if he should. What if she had just been nice in the moment and didn't really mean it? People said things all the time, but that didn't mean they followed through. But tonight felt different. The hunger, the cold, it was all too much. His fingers shook as he reached for the payphone near the corner. He slid in a few coins he had found earlier and dialed the number on the card. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Hello." Marcus hesitated, his throat dry. Miss Whitmore. It's me, Marcus." There was a pause, then her voice warmed with recognition. "Marcus, I'm so glad you called. Are you okay?" He looked down at his soaked clothes and shivered. "Not really," he admitted. "It's raining, and I don't have anywhere to go tonight." "Where are you right now?" she asked quickly. Marcus told her the street corner where he was, and without hesitation, she said, "Stay right there. I'm coming to get you." He wasn't sure if she really would, but he didn't have anywhere else to go. He sat down on the curb, hugging his knees as he waited. 15 minutes later, a sleek black car pulled up in front of him. The passenger window rolled down, and Linda leaned over from the driver's seat. "Marcus, get in," she said gently. He hesitated for only a second before standing up and climbing into the warm car. The heater was on, and the warmth immediately made his fingers tingle as they defrosted. He tried not to get the seat wet from his soaked clothes, but Linda didn't seem to care. "You must be freezing. she said, turning the heat up higher. "Let's get you some food first, then we'll figure things out." Marcus could only nod, his body too exhausted to argue. She drove him to a small diner, where the smell of fresh food made his stomach growl loudly. Linda smiled as she handed him a menu. "Order whatever you want," she said. He picked a hot meal, and when the food arrived, he ate quickly, barely stopping to breathe. Linda watched, her eyes filled with something Marcus didn't quite understand. Was it sadness? Worry? When he finally slowed down, she spoke. "Marcus, I don't want you to spend another night outside. I made a few calls, and I found a place where you can stay. It's a shelter, but it's a safe one. They can help you." Marcus looked up, unsure. "Really?" She nodded. "Yes, and I'll be there to check on you. You don't have to do this alone anymore." For the first time in a long while, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt before. Marcus sat in the warm diner, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Safe. The hot meal in his stomach made him feel a little stronger, and for the first time in months, he wasn't thinking about where he would sleep that night. Linda sat across from him, sipping her coffee, watching him with a kind expression. "I know it's a lot to take in," she said gently, "but I promise, this shelter is a good place. They help kids like you get back on their feet." Marcus nodded slowly. He had stayed in shelters before, but most of them were overcrowded, noisy, and didn't feel safe. People came and went, and sometimes his things got stolen. But something about the way Linda spoke made him believe this place might be different. "When can I go there?" he asked hesitantly. "Tonight," she said. "I called ahead, and they have a bed ready for you. They also have counselors who can help you with school, and even a social worker to see if there are any family members who can take care of you." Marcus looked down at his hands. He had no family, no one to call. He had accepted that a long time ago, but he didn't say anything. Linda seemed to understand. "You don't have to decide everything right now," she said. "Just take it one step at a time." Marcus took a deep breath and nodded. One step at a time. That sounded easier than thinking about the future. After they finished eating, Linda drove him to the shelter. It was a large brick building with a bright sign that read Hope Haven Youth Center. The name alone made something in Marcus's heart feel lighter. Maybe this really was a place where he could start over. As they walked inside, a woman at the front desk smiled warmly. "You must be Marcus," she said. "Welcome to Hope Haven." He nodded shyly, unsure of what to say. Linda placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "I'll come visit soon." "Okay," she promised. Marcus looked up at her. She didn't have to do any of this for him, yet she had. She had treated him with kindness when most people just walked past. "Thank you," he said quietly. Linda smiled. "You're a good kid, Marcus. I know you're going to do great things." With that, she left, and Marcus was led to his new room. It wasn't big, but it had a clean bed, a small desk, and a window. For the first time in a long time, he had a real pillow to lay his head on. As he lay down that night, staring at the ceiling, he thought about everything that had happened. A few days ago, he had nothing. Now he had food, a warm bed, and someone who actually cared. For the first time in a long time, Marcus allowed himself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, his life was finally turning around. Marcus woke up feeling something unfamiliar, rested. The bed was warm, the room was quiet, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sleeping on a cold sidewalk or a hard bench. Sunlight streamed through the small window, casting a golden glow over the room. For a moment, he just lay there, trying to take it all in. A gentle knock on the door made him sit up. A woman peeked inside with a kind smile. "Good morning, Marcus. I'm Miss Carter, one of the counselors here. How did you sleep?" "Good," Marcus admitted, rubbing his eyes. "Glad to hear it. Breakfast is being served in the dining hall if you're hungry," she said. "After that, we can talk about some things, okay?" Marcus nodded, feeling unsure but willing to go along with it. He got up, changed into the fresh clothes the shelter had given him, and made his way to the dining hall. The smell of eggs and toast filled the air, making his stomach growl. He grabbed a tray and sat at a table, watching the other kids around him. Some looked happy, chatting with friends. Others sat alone, their faces guarded. After breakfast, Miss Carter met him in her office. "Marcus, I know you've been through a lot," she said gently. "But I want you to know that you're not alone anymore. We're here to help." Marcus shifted in his chair. "What kind of help?" "Well," she said, "we can help you get back into school if you'd like. We also have programs that teach job skills. And most importantly, we'll make sure you have a safe place to stay while we figure out what's next for you." School. The thought made Marcus uneasy. He hadn't been to school in a long time. Would he even be able to keep up? "I don't know," he said honestly. Miss Carter smiled. "That's okay. You don't have to decide everything today. Just take your time." Over the next few days, Marcus slowly adjusted to life at the shelter. He started making friends with some of the other kids, played basketball in the small gym, and even helped out in the kitchen. He still wasn't sure about school, but the idea didn't seem as scary as before. One evening, as he was finishing dinner, a staff member called his name. "Marcus, there's someone here to see you." His heart skipped a beat. Was it Linda? He walked to the front, and sure enough, there she was, smiling warmly. "Hey, kid," she greeted. Marcus grinned. "Hey. I just wanted to check in on you," she said. "See how you're doing." "I'm okay," Marcus said, realizing he meant it. "Better than before." Linda's smile widened. "That's good to hear. I told you, you deserve a chance." As they sat and talked, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: belonging. Maybe he didn't have a family, but for the first time, he had people who cared. Weeks passed, and Marcus slowly started to feel like a different person. The shelter wasn't just a place to sleep. It was a place where he could rebuild his life. He started attending school again, and though it was hard at first, he kept pushing forward. The teachers were patient, and the other students didn't seem to mind that he was a little behind. Linda visited often, checking in on him and encouraging him to keep going. She even helped him with his homework sometimes, sitting with him at a nearby cafe, explaining things in a way that made sense. One afternoon, after a long school day, Marcus sat across from her at their usual spot. "You know," he said, stirring his hot chocolate, "I never thought things would turn out like this." Linda smiled. "Like what?" "Like good," Marcus said honestly. "For a long time, I thought my life would always be the same, just surviving. But now, I don't know. It feels like maybe I can have a future." "You can," Linda said firmly. "You're smart, you're kind, and you work hard. Those things will take you far." Marcus looked down at his hands. "I don't even know what I want to do yet." "That's okay," Linda assured him. "You have time. Just keep taking it one step at a time. One step at a time." That had become something of a motto for him. As the months went by, Marcus continued to grow. He worked hard in school, made new friends, and even started thinking about what he wanted for his future. The shelter helped him find a part-time job, and for the first time, he had his own money to buy things he needed. Then, one day, something happened that changed everything. Linda called him with exciting news. "Marcus, I've been talking to a friend of mine," she said over the phone. "She runs a program that helps kids find permanent homes. And well, there's a family interested in meeting you." Marcus froze. "A family?" "Yes," Linda said gently. "They're good people. I wouldn't suggest it if I didn't believe that. But only if you're ready." Marcus didn't know what to say. He had spent so long thinking he was alone, that no one wanted him. And now, suddenly, there was a chance, just a small one, that he could have a home again. A few days later, he met them, a kind couple who had always wanted to help kids like him. They talked, they laughed, and for the first time in years, Marcus felt like he belonged. Months later, as he sat at the dinner table with his new family, he looked around and smiled. He had come a long way from that cold street corner where he had once found Linda's purse. Because of one small act of kindness, his life had changed forever. And for the first time, Marcus believed in something he never thought possible.